Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to discuss tattoos, or doing some simple tattoos to spice up your models. So what I've got here is a giant I'm working on for an army, and one of the problems with big figs like this, so you can see here, we'll get him down here completely in the frame, he's a big dude. One of the problems with a fig like this is that he's mostly skin. Now, he's going to be a stone giant, so what you're looking at here is actually more or less his finished skin. It's all gray. So we're going to have to rely on other colors to make it interesting and all that kind of stuff, but here we go. The problem is when you look at something like his back here, this is just a bunch of big, boring open space. And it's fine, like we've got some shadows down here and stuff, and you know, there's a little bit of visual interest, but for the most part, this is just a big blank space of nothing, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to use some tattoos to make this area here interesting. What I've really got is this is the space, right? This is my, like this, if you cut this out, this is my palette, my area I need to work on. Okay, so what are we going to do for tattoos? Well, even though I'm working in a gray tone skin, the lessons here are going to be the same either way. In general, when you do a lot of simple tattoos, you want some kind, let's move him to the side for just a moment. We want some kind of blue tone in it, like usually a dark blue tone. Inks tend to be blue, tattoos tend to have a slight blue tone to them. I do not mean sky blue. This is not an appropriate color for most tattoos, unless you're going for like a full freehand, like you're trying to do colored art. Most of the time, if you're trying to represent tattoo ink, it should be something in a dark blue black. This will look insane. Okay. So we've got some blue ink, we've got some black because we want to tint it down, and then we've got what was sort of one of the base tones for his flesh. In this case, this is this blue-gray. Now, this would get replaced with any normal flesh tone. If you were working on a very pale model, you'd use pale flesh, right, or whatever. And whatever that happens to be, this is your flesh tone. So there's three colors that are going to be the primary component of every tattoo. A light blue or a dark blue that you mix in lightly to your black, and then the flesh tone itself. We're going to use these in different ways. Okay, so, all right, we got all that. All right, I'm going to refresh this over here on my palette. I think I've got everything basically ready to go, and then we're going to do some tattoos. Now, the next thing to think about with tattoos is what kind of design are you going to do? Get him back in frame here. In this case, I have and your best reference for that, as always, is the internet. Start by Googling some images, which can be funny when you start Googling things like this, because how do you find the exact tattoo you want? You can end up seeing some strange things on the internet, but there we go. So I Googled around until I found a tattoo design that I enjoyed. Okay, just gonna bring my paper towel down here. Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take some over here, my palette's over off camera, but I'm going to take some of that black. I'm going to mix it in with some of that blue ink. And the nice part about using something like a blue ink, by the way, if you don't have access to like the paints that I happen to like the watercolors for this. If you don't have access to these paints, it's no big deal. You don't need these exact things. Any dark blue, you could use like a Drakenhof Nightshade from Citadel. You can use their black, whatever you like. Okay. All right. So I'm just getting it all mixed up. And what I should come out with is something, in this case, that looks like that. So there's my blue, my black, and my skin tone. Okay. So we're going to get that on our brush. Now, as always when we're doing our freehand, we want the paint to be fairly wet. I'll show you how it looks on my thumb. There you go. All right, which the ink is going to help, or the shade or whatever is going to help. And we don't want a lot of excess on the brush. I'm wiping off the excess onto both my thumb and onto the paper towel that's down there out of frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my design. You have to excuse me, my hand might occasionally pass into frame here. Doing freehand on camera is always fun. Okay, here we go. So I'm looking at a reference while I'm doing this. And the key is you're just going to start drawing it on. Whatever your reference image looks like, you're going to try to start doing it. You always want to work in thin lines first, and then start building out your shape. Okay? So don't worry about trying to draw the whole thing in one solid go. Okay? Like if I work really thin, let's say I want to build this line out. Always start as thin as you can. If I want to build this line out into a sweeping pattern here, which I do, okay, and you want to keep your paint fairly wet because you want nice flow onto the model. We don't want to have to push our brush very hard because we want really good control. But if I want to push this out, I can, because I can come back in and just build this line. And so then I start drawing my pattern. Again, I'm going to start with a thin line. I want this to be much thicker, but I don't need it to be that thick right out of the gate. Okay. And all I'm doing here is just, as you can see, just slowly creating my image. Right? Very, very simple stuff. And the key is, one of the tricks with tattoos and any kind of freehand like this is the more you create visual confusion by having a lot of this going in different directions, non-even lines, and a lot of space going on. Like when this is all done, I'm going to have a lot of tattoo on his back. Like I'm not going to record all of this. I'm going to do some of this off camera because this is a really big tattoo we want to do here. But the key with it is that by putting this much on, if I have little tiny inconsistencies in it, you won't notice it because you'll see the whole image. Okay? Alright, so now we want to connect that up. And when your paint gets dry, when you're having to push the brush on, you notice how my brush, it started bending there? Like I had to really push to get paint out? That means it's time for you to refresh. Whenever that starts happening, stop. Do not push your paint. Do not do that. I'm barely touching the model right now. Like very, very lightly. And that's what we want. We want a nice flow of a thin controlled line that I can then come in and reinforce as I need to. Right? I can slowly build up those edges exactly how I want them. Okay? So you can see how this is starting to shape up. Again, keep your paint wet. Start building your design. Work in thin lines. Build them up. Okay? Alright. I'm going to do a bunch more of this off camera. I'm going to come back and talk about what are my next steps. Alright? So back in a moment. Alright, and we're back. So you can see we've got the tattoo mostly sketched out. We filled up our space. We've got something breaking up all this open, sort of flesh on the back. So now, our next step is we need to clean it up. Okay? So same paint still is out on our palette. Okay? And what we got to do here is, the issue we have is that because we kept this thin so we have a good flow, we want to make sure our lines are nice and sharp, and so we're going to go in and very carefully here, again with thinned paint. Okay, we're going to make sure that we take each line and give it a nice sharp edge. So we want to get our brush, and this is why we purposely work thinner than we need to, because sometimes when you're doing this you might thicken the line up just a little, and you want to make sure that you, in doing so, you don't run, like one section of the tattoo over another. So the idea here is, I'm just kind of tracing my edges wherever I see like something is slightly inconsistent. And if you had like there where I had a little split, I'll just make a little, that shape. You know, one of the nice part about these sorts of like freehand tattoos where you're not doing like art, that is to say I'm not doing like a, you know, a skull with wings or something, is that what exactly the image is fairly abstract. So we can be a little more loosey-goosey with it. Okay. Like I see down here, we've got some work to do. Okay. So the idea is I'm just making sure these lines have the right directionality to them. Like we don't, one of the things we want to avoid is you don't want it to be like thick, then thinner, and then thicker again, right? You want a consistent directionality to it. That's one of the things that's going to make it look like an actual tattoo, especially if you're going for this kind of a pattern. So if you have a line getting thinner, you know, unless it's swooping out like this, and so you're meant to have this fat edge on it, when you have a long straight line, you want to make sure that it's universally getting either thicker or thinner as you go towards the base of the thing. For whatever reason, our eyes just find that effect pleasing, and if it doesn't look like that, people will notice and it will stand out. With the little loopies, it can be a little different. Okay. All right. So let's call that good enough. I'll probably do a little more off camera, but for the most part, that's good. Okay, so next up, this came out, you know, so what we're going to do next is we want to reinforce some of that blue. I had some of it in my paint, but it's not very strong. And the reason that's why I work with the ink or the shade, so I can then take some of that straight blue and thin it out with just a little bit of water. I'm just getting it over here on my palette. And again, we'll test here. You can see how thin that is. Okay. And what I'm going to do now, let's bring him back in camera, is I'm just going to kind of run this over the middle. And what I'm looking to do is, because one of the other advantages to working in that thinner paint is just a little bit of the skin shows through. In this case, the skin is gray, but it wouldn't matter if you were dealing with like a, say, a Caucasian flesh tone. It would be showing through just slightly with that, you know, more pale skin tone. So in either case, that's going to pick up a little bit of this blue and help the tattoo read as having that slight tinge of blue ink to it. It doesn't need to be huge. We're going for an incredibly desaturated, subtle thing here. But tattoos have that just tiny amount of blue tinge to them. And just doing a nice thin glaze of an ink or something over top, one, it helps your tattoo be more consistent as far as the image goes, and two, it reinforces the color, that how we want this to read. And you notice what I'm doing here is mostly just tracing the lines. Nothing too crazy. Okay. Now that probably doesn't read much different on camera, but it's a little bit more blue in real life. And also the advantage here is it then reinforces our whole design. You can see it looks a little bit more clean now. There's a little problem I want to touch up quickly while I see it. There we go. There we go. Okay. All right. So now comes the final and most important step. Okay? The thing about tattoos is that unless this guy just got this the other day, it fades. Tattoos fade. If you've ever seen somebody with an old tattoo, I don't happen to have any I can show on camera, but if you or you yourself have one, you know that you can see somewhat of your skin through the tattoo. They don't, you know, as time goes on and your skin gets scratched and you grow new skin cells and all that kind of thing, right? What happens is you get a bit of a fade. It starts to be a little more skin tone. So what we want to do is we want to take our mid-tone of whatever our skin color was. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my mid-tone blue color. I'm going to get that some of that over on my palette. And what we're going to do is we're going to glaze over the whole tattoo. Okay? And when I say glaze, I mean glaze. I don't mean, like, the last thing you want to do is put too much color down and undo all the work you just did. You can always go a second time over it. You can't take the paint back off. Okay? So it really behooves you to be lighter here. So we're going to test on the back of our hand, as always. And you can see how much of my skin that covers up. You also notice how much paint is on my brush. You really can't even barely tell. Okay? And so now what I'm going to do is just very lightly glaze over everything. I don't want a lot of extra paint. If I see it, it's going to be fairly thin, so I need to push it around quickly. If I get too much, we just wipe it away. But we're purposely working in very thin, very wet paint, and we have very little of it on our brush. And every time you go back in the paint, retest it. Make sure you still got the right amount on. Watch out for your divots or anything like that, because those will catch a bunch of paint and you'll get buildup, and you don't want that. And if you have big spots like, oh, sorry, went off camera there. Here we go. If you have big spots like this that are highlighted, you can actually go in and make a glaze out of your highlighter color, you know, whatever it was. In this case, it's literally just a little white on top of it. So we get an even lighter glaze. And for my top parts of the tattoo up here, I want to run that over. Same thing for the darker color. If I have shadows, I can take my mid-tone, I can darken it down into a dark glaze, and I can darken those shadows. Okay. And so now what we get is a nice faded tattoo that looks like this guy's had this for a while. He's been out in the sun. He had a nice solid tattoo. It's starting to wear a little, right? Because obviously this dude doesn't wear a shirt very often, I strongly suspect. And so he's able to, and then so as the sun has baked this dude and he's tanned, which I assume makes a stone giant turn more light gray, that's what's happened. So there you go. Now we've got our nice finished tattoo all ready to go. All in all, honestly, not too complicated, but that final glaze makes a big deal because it's what makes it really look like it's sunk into the skin, right? Because the ink has penetrated the layers of skin. And now, as that happens and that dries, we can see, there we go. Beautiful. Okay? And again, all that was 3 colors. A black, some kind of blue, like a blue shade or ink, and then whatever your skin tone is. Again, in mine it was gray, and yours it would be flesh or dark flesh or whatever you happen to be tattooing on. So there you go. Hope you enjoy. Hope you found this little hobby cheating on tattoos useful and it inspires you to put some sweet tats on all your own minis. It's a great way to break up large flesh tone and make your minis have some more visual interest. As always, give it a like if you like it. Subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. Always feel free to share. That is always the nicest thing you can do. And we'll see you next time.